Okay, Chair, we're now live.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors, and welcome to this virtual council meeting of Charnwood Borough Council. I would briefly like to run through some housekeeping arrangements. Please note this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be made available on the council's website following this meeting. In addition, under the Openness of Local Government Bodies regulations, people may film, record, tweet, or blog from this meeting, and this is outside the council's control. Please note that members of the public viewing this meeting via live stream can only see the person who is speaking. Also, that it takes a second or so for Zoom to switch view to the person when they begin. Participants should please ensure that their microphone is muted when they are not speaking. As this is a virtual meeting, it will run slightly different. Councillors and honorary aldermen, please use the raise hand feature in the participant section of the Zoom software to indicate that you can see and hear the proceedings. So if you can do that now, councillors, I'll be grateful.
It's a little bit low for me. I can't.
Madam, Mr. Mayor, I've checked the blue hands and I can confirm that we have attendance apart from, it would appear from, we have apologies from Councillor Howe, Goddard, Paling, and Honorary Alderman Joe Tormey, Tony Stott, Robert Shields, John Bush, and I'm also looking down the attendance list and we are also missing Councillors Matthew Brooks and Councillor Hajjai Nicolau. Thank you.
Thank you. And you'll probably check on the ones that are coming and let me know if that's possible. I also have some officers attending tonight, which are Rob Mitchell, the Chief Executive, Simon Jackson, Director of Corporate Services and S151 Officer, Adrian Ward, Monitoring Officer, Matt Gudger, Information Development Manager, Karen Widdowson, Democratic Services Manager, Sally Watson, Democratic Services Officer, and Nikki Conway, Democratic Services Officer. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. Karen Widdowson has just read out the ones that I've given their apologies. Are there any more apologies? Can I just check with Karen that we're okay to proceed?
Yeah, so Mr. Mayor, I can confirm that there are no other hands indicated for any other apologies, so we can proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. In the absence of my chaplain on this occasion, I would like to read a prose poem. It has been said before at this council, but it was a long time ago, and I think it's worth repeating. Very slowly the days are growing longer and the nights are becoming shorter. The snowdrops herald the beginning of a new cycle. Over the weeks, as the earth warms, we will see the life returning again to our old, cold, damp lands. For a few short months, the flowers will bloom, insects will fill the air, and the trees will be decked in green, before once more our granite island, perched in the green-grey North Sea, descends into sleep of winter. And so it has been for millennia, the cycle of birth, life and death to which all living things are subject and for which nothing escapes. All of us here have been blessed with the gift of life, a wondrous experience filled with joys and sorrows, an adventure that will last a lifetime before passing all too quickly away. We all bring with us into this life the seeds of our own potential, a unique combination of gifts, talents, and personality that we alone possess. In this short season that we have in this world, let us seek the inspiration to live a rich and creative lives. Let us give ourselves fully to each moment, offering all we have in the knowledge that life is to be lived and that we have an obligation to shine as brightly as we can shine, to make the most of our potential and to enrich this world while we are here, so that when our cycle ends, the deep soil of human achievement has been enriched by our presence, and a new generation can grow and flourish in the world that we help to create. I'll now move on to item 2, disclosure of personal interest. Members of the council, please indicate whether you have any interest to disclose in any item of business to be considered at the meeting. I have 2 hands come up. Councillor Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On item 8.1, local government reorganisation, as a member of Leicestershire County Council.
I think at this time there's no decision being made, so I don't think it's necessary, but I will just check with Adrian that that is the case.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My advice would be, as you just indicated, because it's not an item for decision, there is no need to declare interest as county councillors.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mayor. I declare an interest, personal interest in item 9.1 as the Member of Parliament for Loughborough. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think there's any more. I'll move on. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. I move that the minutes of the meeting of the council held on the 29th of June 2020 be confirmed and signed as a correct record. Councillor Baines.
I second the minutes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to raise anything on the accuracy of the minutes? If so, please state the minute number you're in question. I see no blue hands. Since no issues have been raised, I take this to signify that the minutes are acceptable as a correct record. Thank you. I will now sign the official minutes I have here with me and pass to the Democratic Service Manager in due course for archiving. Next item is item 4, announcements. These are my announcements. I have the following announcements to make. Firstly of all, I would like to express my sadness at the passing of former councillor Marion Smith in June this year. Marion represented the Loughborough Southfields ward for 4 years, from May 2011 to May 2015 as a Labour councillor. During her time as a councillor, Marion held positions on the Licence Committee, Plans Committee and Policy Scrutiny Group between 2012 and 2014. As a passionate gardener, she was regularly involved in Loughborough in the Bloom and became chair of the Loughborough in Bloom board on 2017, helping many community groups to blossom. She was a school governor at Mountfield Lodge for more than 30 years. Marion was excellent in fundraising. She raised money for John Storer House and its allotment project, Loughborough Town of Sanctuary and Loughborough Labour Party, often by baking cakes through the sale of honey or plants from her garden in Herrick Road, Loughborough. Councillors, I invite you to take part in a 1-minute silence now and stay behind after the public meeting concludes to pay your respects. Thank you. Recently, I was delighted to be invited to the Community Hub in Loughborough to see the incredible work of the Charnwood Community Action Team firsthand, and also to mark the delivery on the 10,000th food parcel. These past few months have been very difficult for our communities, and I know everyone involved with Charnwood Community Action has worked incredibly hard to help those who needed a bit of additional support during this time. They should be proud of what they have achieved. It's been wonderful to see volunteers, local community groups and businesses pulling together to offer support to their neighbourhoods and the hub. I would like to say thank you to everyone who has played their part in helping our communities. 4.2, Leader's Announcement. I call on the leader to make his announcements.
Madam Mayor, sorry. Mr.
Close.
Mayor, I have no announcements to make.
Thank you. 4.3, Chief Executive's announcements.
Mr. Mayor, I have a quick point of clarification, if I may, please. The item at number 13 on the agenda is a request for council to note decisions made earlier in the pandemic. One of those decisions was to extend committee positions until such time as we could hold an annual meeting. Therefore, the committee positions listed in that item refer to the period prior to the annual meeting and have now been superseded. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item is item 5, petitions. Are there any petitions to be presented? I didn't get any come up, I think, so I'll move on. Thank you. Item 6, business reserved to council. Item 6.1, local government and social care ombudsman review, letter 2019-20, page 14. I call on Councillor Rollins to propose the item.
Mr. Mayor, to comply with the guidance from the local government and social care ombudsman that the monitoring officer should make members aware of upheld complaints on a periodic basis, I move that the local government and social care ombudsman's review letter of 2019-20 attached as Appendix A and the summary of the complaints as set out in Part B of this report be noted.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I'm happy to second the motion and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. If any councillor would like to speak, please press the raise hand feature in Zoom. Councillor Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Even though the two complaints which have been upheld may seem minor, we still need to be sure that the findings of the Ombudsman are taken seriously and we take note of what they are telling us. It does concern me when we read of delays or the council not communicating properly with its residents, but I'm also happy to read that all the recommendations and actions of the Ombudsman have been acted upon. I think it's very important that we take on board what they are telling us and action them, but also going forward in future years that we don't fall into we don't have these minor complaints go forward to the Ombudsman. We should stop them earlier and they should be spotted by the senior management, senior leadership team if nobody else. But we are happy to note the report. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other hands raised, so I'll go back to Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got nothing further to add.
Thank you. Councillor Rollins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in summary, of course, any complaint is one too many, but in circumstances where we are an authority that deal with thousands of residents each year, 2 complaints to the Ombudsman, relatively speaking, is low, but I accept any one is too many, and always things can be done to improve, and the council will very much take on board what's been said in the Ombudsman's report. You'll also note that in the Ombudsman's report, it does say that compliance with recommendations from the Ombudsman has been at 100%. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I now have to put this motion to the vote. I'm now going to call out each member's name in alphabetical order to ask they would like to vote. I would like to remind members that at any point they did not hear or the proceedings of this item, they should not participate in the vote. You did have a note come through earlier on to say that the way that we should explain this, and you need to put your name first, and then I have listened and watched the proceedings. I am for, against, or abstain on the motion. So can I start with Councillor Bailey?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Bailey, I have heard and watched the proceedings. I am for this. Thank you.
Councillor Baines.
Councillor Baines here. I've heard and can see the proceedings. I support the without amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Barclay.
I have heard and listened to the proceedings, and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Ian Bentley.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have both seen and heard the proceedings, and I am for.
Councillor Boker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have seen and heard the proceedings. I am for.
Councillor Baldwin.
Mute.
Councillor Baldwin. Come back to that. Oh, sorry.
No, I'd forgotten to unmute myself. I've listened and watched the proceedings, and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Bolton here. I've heard and watched the proceedings, and I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Simon Bradshaw. Councillor Simon Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings, and I'm for the motion.
Councillor Julie Bradshaw.
Councillor Julie Bradshaw. I have listened and watched proceedings, and I'm in favour.
Councillor Alice Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings, and I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. I'm not sure, Councillor Brooks, whether Councillor Brooks is here.
Mr. Mayor, I can confirm that Councillor Brooks is not in attendance.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Camsell.
Council, I've seen and heard the proceedings, and I'm in favour. Thank you.
Councillor Capleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confirm that I've seen and heard the proceedings, and I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have seen and heard the proceedings, and I am for the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Lee Harper-Davis.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Lee Harper-Davies. I can see and hear all proceedings, and I'm for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Draycott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Mary Draycott. I have listened and watched the proceedings, and I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest.
I have heard and watched the proceedings, and I am for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gerard.
Thank you. I've seen and watched the proceedings, and I'm in for. Thank you.
Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Grimley, I've seen and heard the proceedings. I'm for the motion.
Thank you. I'm not sure about Councillor Hadji Nicolai.
So, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Hadji Nicolai is not in attendance. Can I just clarify, has Councillor Hilary Fryer voted as well?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't asked then.
Sorry about that.
But I can confirm that I have listened and seen the proceedings, and I am for.
Thank you so much. And I'll try and get it right next time. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Hamilton, I have listened and watched proceedings and I am for.
Thank you. Councillor Keith Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Keith Harris. I have listened to and heard the proceedings and I'm for.
Thank you. Councillor Christine Harris.
Oh, good. I've not, sorry, I've not, I have listened and watched the proceedings. I am for the motion.
Thank you so much.
So
Councillor
sorry.
Hunt. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Jane Hunt, I have listened and watched the proceedings and I'm for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Lowe. Councillor Mark Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mayor. I have listened and watched the proceedings and I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Seen, heard and for.
Thank you. Councillor Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor May here. I have seen and heard the proceedings and I am for the item.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Mr. Mayor, good evening.
Good evening.
I have seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have listened and watched the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Pacey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Pacey, I have heard and seen the proceedings and am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Paling. Move on.
Mr. Mayor, if I can just clarify, Councillor Paling has given apologies, so we're going on to Councillor Jeff Parsons next. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Parsons, I can confirm I've listened and watched proceedings and am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Parton.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Parton. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Poland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm that I can see and hear, and indeed have seen and heard the proceedings, and I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Popley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Popley, I have both seen and heard the proceedings. I am for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Christine Radford. Councillor Christine Radford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have listened and watched the proceedings and support the motion.
Councillor Ransom.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I have seen
Good
and
evening.
watched the proceedings and I'm for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Attray.
Hello, Mr. Mayor.
Hi.
Councillor Rattray here. I have seen and heard the proceedings and I'm in favour of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rollins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm I have seen and heard proceedings and I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Mayor. I am confirm I've seen and watched the proceedings and I confirm. I'm for. Sorry, I'm for.
Yeah, got it. Councillor Seaton.
Hello, I'm Councillor Brenda Seaton. I have heard and seen the proceedings and I am for.
Thank you. Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confirm that I have seen and heard the proceedings and I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Smidovich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Smidowitz, I have both seen and heard the proceedings and I'm voting for.
Thank you. I have seen and confirm I have seen all the going on tonight and I support the motion. Councillor Joan Tassell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Joan Tassell, I've seen and heard the proceedings and I am voting for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Deborah Taylor. I've seen and heard the procedure and I vote for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confirm I've seen and heard proceedings and I'm for.
Thank you. And Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confirm that I have seen and heard proceedings and I'm voting in favour.
Thank you. After all that, probably go to Karen Widdowson just to check the numbers.
So, Mr. Mayor, I confirm that I've looked at the numbers. It's meant to be Adrian first, but the total is 47-4. So if Adrian Ward can confirm the numbers, please. Thank you.
I think it's quicker, Mr. Mayor, if I just confirm it was unanimously for.
Thank you so much. The motion is carried. Thank you. We'll move on to item 6.2, annual review of the council's constitution, page 20. I call on Councillor Smidovich to propose the item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Smidowitz here. So, Mr. Mayor, to ensure the Constitution is kept up to date and fulfils its intended purposes, I move that the changes to the Constitution set out in Appendix 1 to the report of the Monitoring Officer, which is attached as an annex, be made to be effective from the 8th of September 2020.
Councillor Poland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I second this and reserve my right to speak.
If any councillor would like to speak, please press and raise hand feature on Zoom. Got two at the moment. Councillor Parton.
We can take a lesson from the county council's constitution, which is something that seems to have been followed here. In the papers, it talks about a councillor that asked if the length of time someone could speak on questions on notice was extended. My hope was that it would be moved to about 3 minutes, as previously it was when I first joined the council. And it was quite a surprise to see it was dropped to 1. But then I realised that actually this is concurrent with other councils. And at Leicestershire County Council, this has worked very well, because what has happened, it has shortened the length of time on questions on notice. But what it has done, it's allowed the motions to be put, and they can be debated by multiple councillors. And for example, in the last 3 years, we've seen some stunning debates about really serious issues, things such as disabled children's transport, women's pension rights, highways maintenance, and housing schemes and transport networks surrounding them. And so this tweak to the Constitution will allow, going in the previous meetings that we have now, until the Constitution is perhaps changed again, to see just when we're able to see how it's fared out, we're actually able to have debates through motions. Often feel we don't have enough, but now we will be in a position where we can do that. And we can have some great debate on things, important things like council housing, antisocial behaviours, our green spaces, and of course our finances and our recovery from COVID-19. So when I first looked at this, I was very disappointed, but then I realised that this will give all members the opportunity to really tackle some big issues. And so I look forward to the next council meeting.
Thank you. I call on now Councillor Baldwin.
I hear what Councillor Parton has been saying, but I don't accept that meaty issues can't still be debated by keeping the speaking for supplementary questions to 2 minutes. I just find that if you're actually thanking the member, the lead member for his reply, and then having to, I mean, that cuts a good 15 seconds off your 1 minute for a start. So I'm not satisfied that reducing it to 1 minute is acceptable in my view.
Thank you. Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like Councillor Baldwin, I'm very disappointed that the response to council questions is being reduced to 1 minute. A few months ago, when Councillor Seaton was Mayor, she quite rightly reminded us all that we must thank the Cabinet Lead and officers for preparing their response. And like Councillor Baldwin has already said, if we're to continue to be courteous, this reduces our response time to around 45 seconds. This is insufficient and it's undemocratic. To retain 2 minutes will add no more than, on average, 10 minutes to the length of a meeting. And while we're all busy people, I'm sure we can all manage that in the interests of democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I understand the need to tinker with the Constitution to bring it up to date and align it with what is happening in the council at this moment in time. However, there is one thing that the Labour group do not agree with, and you've heard some of the arguments there. When it comes to the amendments to the Constitution, that is removing the freedom of councillors to make statements to answers received to questions that they have submitted, and reducing that time to 1 minute. On average, we have around 5 to 8 questions asked by councillors of all parties and all sides to each council meeting. And as an example, to this meeting, we have 6 questions. So a 1 minute reduction in time would only save 6 minutes. So the cynic in me thinks this isn't about saving time. Therefore, it must be a purely political decision to stop councillors of all sides making valuable and informative statements to the rest of council. I think this is totally wrong. Justifications in the notes is given that other councils don't allow statements, etc. And Councillor Parton touched on Leicestershire County Council. However, why do we have to be like other councils? We have something great here, but it seems the Cabinet want to silence individual councillors. Unfortunately, official businesses on our main council agendas are very sterile affairs and are increasingly becoming so. If these changes are accepted, then individual councillors will have lost a valuable tool and the Cabinet gained another method to silence them. I urge all councillors to vote against this item. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. These amendments to our constitution lead me to question, what are we here for? Now, I joined the council to further democracy and to help local people to have a say. We can afford to take the time that, I don't know if other councillors thought so, but it seemed like aeons to go through every councillor and repeat that we've understood the motion and whether we're for it or against it. I think that we can afford a few more minutes for councillors to express themselves in the answer to questions. We are here to ensure democracy and transparency, and this amendment threatens our ability to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I have no more hands raised, so could I go back to Councillor Poland?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to all the members for the contributions. In terms of the reducing time, I mean, as Councillor Parton says, and as it says in the report, this is simply bringing us in line with what other councils do as the norm. I think it's important to focus on what the purpose of a supplementary question is, and that is to get clarification from the answers previously given. Other councils find that a minute is fine for that purpose, and I've no reason to believe that we would be different in that regard. If, however, members do want more information or to raise a slightly different topic, they can absolutely do that by contacting the lead member, and we will be more than happy to engage and give the information that members want. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Councillor Smidovich to sum up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Smidowitz here. I have understood that the officers have investigated the time limits that other boroughs and councils have proposed. They're totally consistent with what is being done in the majority of councils. I also pick up the point that Councillor Poland made that certainly all of us would encourage any questions. Any lead member on cabinet would welcome any questions, and further clarification will be provided to anybody that has any concerns about anything to do with the council. So I would therefore encourage members to vote for the proposal as set out. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now putting the motion to the vote. I'm now going to call on each member's name in alphabetical order to ask how they would like to vote. I would like to remind members that at any point they did not hear or proceedings of this item, they should not participate in the vote. I think it went reasonably well last time, other than I missed somebody out, so I'll try by better this time. Right, Councillor Richard Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have seen and heard the proceedings and I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard everything. I'm for the motion.
Councillor Barclay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've listened and watched proceedings. I am for the motion.
Councillor Bentley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've both seen and heard the proceedings. I'm for.
Councillor Bowker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Seen and heard and for.
Councillor Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard and against.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm voting against the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Simon Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm voting for, please.
Thank you. Councillor Julie Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Julie Bradshaw. I've listened and watched proceedings and I am against the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have seen and heard the proceedings and I'm against the motion.
Councillor Camsell.
Mr. Mayor, I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Councillor Capleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confirm I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm in favour of the motion.
Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confirm I've seen and heard the proceedings and I am for the motion.
Councillor Lee Harper Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can see and hear. I'm for.
Councillor Mary Draycott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard and against the motion.
Councillor Sandy Forrest.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Sandy Forrest. I confirm that I have seen and heard the proceedings and I am against the motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I've got to get this one right. Councillor Fryer.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hilary Fryer. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Gerard.
Seen and heard, I'm for.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Grimley. I've seen and heard the proceedings. I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Probably Karen Widdowson will correct me. Is Leon Adenikolou here tonight or not?
Mr Mayor, I can confirm that Councillor Hajj Nicolau is not in attendance. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I can confirm that I have listened to and watched proceedings, and I am voting against the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Keith Harris.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Keith Harris. I have listened to and seen the proceedings. I am against.
Thank you. Councillor Christine Harris.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have listened and watched to the proceedings. I am against the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Councillor Jane Hunt here. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I am for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Mercer.
Seen, heard, for.
Thank you. Might have to be a bit longer because they don't get talked about otherwise, I think. Councillor Joel Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have listened to and seen the proceedings and I am against the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Mr Mayor, I have seen and heard and I'm for.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have listened and watched the proceedings and I am for the motion.
Councillor Needham.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I can confirm that I've seen and heard all the proceedings and I am voting against the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Pacey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Pacey, I've heard and seen the proceedings and am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons.
I've seen and heard and am reluctantly for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Parton.
Councillor Parton, I've seen and heard the proceedings. I am for the motion.
Councillor Poland.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have seen, heard and been involved in the proceedings. I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Popley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Radford.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Radford here. I have listened and watched the proceedings and support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Ransom.
Good evening, Mr Mayor. Thank you. I've seen and heard and I'm for. Thank you.
Councillor Shana Rattray.
Thank you. Thank you. I've seen and heard and for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Rollins.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have seen and heard proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've heard and seen the motion and I'm for the motion. I've both heard and seen the proceedings, sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Seaton.
I can confirm that I can see and hear the motion at the hearings and I'm for the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I confirm that I've seen and heard the proceedings and I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Smidovich.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm both for, I've heard and seen the proposal and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. I think most people have seen me too much tonight now, so, but I'm for the motion. Thank you. Councillor Tassell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have seen and heard the debate and I am in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Deborah Taylor, I've seen and heard the proceedings and I vote for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Jennifer Tillotson, I've seen and heard the motion and I'm against.
Thank you. And Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confirm that I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm voting against the motion.
Thank you. I'll try and get this the right way round this time now. So I'll go to...
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
I just need to interject. I've realised that we do actually have Councillor Matthew Brooks in the attendance now. He's joined
Oh,
the
right.
meeting.
He's joined it.
So, yes. So
All right. Okay.
Councillor Brooks, can you indicate which way you would be voting, please? Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I'd like to apologise for my late arrival, a couple of technical difficulties. I can confirm that I was privy to the entirety of that item, and I've been able to see and hear, and that I am for that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Now I can probably go to Adrian Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have 35 votes in favour, 13 against and no abstentions.
Thank you. Can you confirm that, Karen?
Mr. Mayor, I can confirm the same numbers as well, so the motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you. So I can confirm the motion carried. Thank you. Can I move on to item 7, call-in references? There are no call-in references from scrutiny. We'll go on to item 8 now, position statement. The text of the 2 position statements are printed on pages 3-5 of the supplementary agenda. The statements will be introduced, and after that, councillors who wish can speak up to 2 minutes each, and the discussion can last up to 20 minutes per position statement. At the end of the discussion, there will be a summary. Local government white paper, devolution and local recovery. I call on Councillor Morgan to introduce the position statement regarding the local government white paper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Over the summer, during one of our councillor briefing sessions, I promised that we would bring a position statement to the next full council to update councillors on where we were with the government's expected white paper on devolution and reform of local government. As yet, the paper hasn't been published, and now it's expected to be published possibly sometime in early October, possibly maybe later. However, there have been some developments over the summer, and I still thought that it was worthwhile to bring a position statement to full council, so that members would have a few more bits of information that had been raised by ministers over the summer. District leaders had met during the summer and had agreed, following discussions that the ministerial team had with other areas around the country, that we would offer the local government minister, Simon Clarke, the opportunity to actually meet not only with district but also county, city council leaders in Leicestershire to discuss the government's white paper. I have today received a message from Simon Clarke to confirm that he would be very happy to meet with us. So I hope to actually organise that following the publication of the white paper when it comes out. However, as a council, we do need to be in a position to review the white paper when it comes out, so we have a full understanding of its implications for us here at Charnwood. And as such, you can see that there's a motion at the bottom of the position statement to enable us to actually start that process, so that once the white paper is published, officers can pull up and put together a response and clarify the implications on for us here in Charnwood, and that can then go through Scrutiny Commission, Cabinet, and come back to Council. And it's important that all councillors get the opportunity to express a view over the white paper, because it will have a big impact, I suspect, not only on our residents and businesses, but on the wider area of the East Midlands. So this position statement enables councillors to discuss the information as put out now. The white paper has not been published, so we still don't know the contents, but the motion, hopefully, whilst it doesn't commit any member to have a view, particularly on the white paper, it will allow us at least to put wheels in motion to enable a paper to come back to the next full council that will be able to be discussed in detail. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. If any councillor would like to speak, please press the raise hand feature in the Zoom. Councillor Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I welcome the position statement and congratulate Jonathan for bringing it. He did promise it as in a briefing, and so it has appeared. Unfortunately, the government haven't kept to their part of the bargain, and the white paper hasn't been published yet. So this is more like a holding document that is bought. But it's shaping up to be a very turbulent time for local government. Not only do we have the impacts of COVID-19 to contend with, but it seems a wholesale restructuring of local government is at hand. Is the timing right? Aren't priorities and focuses rightly elsewhere? I think they should be, but this chaotic government seems to know best. And at this time when we are stretched financially, they think that reorganising local government is best. So what will the future be? Will it be one unitary under the county, or will it be two or more led by some of the old districts? Well, we don't know, and until the white paper is published, we won't know. But all I can urge is that for the sake of our residents, that cordial dialogue is maintained between the districts and county. Last year, it got a bit fictitious, and I think a few of us on which were twin-hatted or double-hatted saw the frictions on both sides. And this time around, I think we should be cordial. We should sit down. If it's going to happen, let's do it the right way. But whatever comes next for Charnwood must be for the benefit of our residents and not to the detriment. And we in the Labour group will make sure that we fight for the best for Charnwood residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fryer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I was down, I believe we have to have a vote on this because there is a motion, and I was willing to second Councillor Morgan's statement and proposal. Yes, this is a difficult thing, and is it a priority at this time when we're all as a country struggling with something no one this time last year would ever have imagined the world and the country and the council would be in this position. I know Councillor Meir has to speak up for his party, but I have to say that I think all things considered and the unknown circumstances we've been in, everyone has done the very best they can. I'm pleased to see that the leader is leading on the talks with the other districts, and that Simon Clarke MP is more than willing to come and discuss it further with them. The motion at the end of the paper is that it goes through scrutiny to Cabinet, and then this council will have a full and frank discussion about it. We all know that we have to do something, and I think most of us are intelligent, and we all are intelligent in our own way, and we can take this on board. I have one clarification I would like to put to the leader. At the moment, it's not expected that this white paper will be published much before the end of October. Our next meeting is on the 9th of November, and after that, it's not until the middle of January. If this white paper is published as requested, would the leader and the chief exec consider having an extra meeting just to discuss this once it's gone through scrutiny and the meetings with the Simon Clarke? Thank you very much, but I will be supporting the motion at the end of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I see any more hands raised? I haven't got you down. Did you want to speak, Councillor Parton?
Mr. Mayor, it was to second Councillor Fry's proposal that we have an extra council meeting to discuss this matter.
Could we just leave that till the leader has his summing up at the end, so we'll see what it may not be necessary. Councillor Tillotson, I see you have raised the hand now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, if Councillor Parton hadn't have said what he was said I was going to say the same, but I also want to just support what Councillor Mears said about maintaining good relationships with the county council. I was heavily involved when Leicester became unitary. I was an officer working in Leicester, and I was 100% working on Leicester's unitary status. And I can confirm that the relationship between Leicester City and the county council was awful, awful. And it wasn't any good for officers, for the services, for anybody. And if we can avoid that without necessarily doing what the county wants us to do, then that will be for the benefit of our residents.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got no more speakers coming up, so it's back to the leader, Councillor Morgan, to sum up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I take on note all the points raised. There has been a newspaper story today that suggested that the white paper may be published sometime between the 5th and 7th of October. So taking that, hopefully the November council meeting would still be appropriate time to bring it back to. However, if it does slip, I absolutely think this is too important not to actually hold a council meeting on its own. And certainly I will be asking the chief exec to call a council meeting as appropriate to make sure that we have the information at hand to discuss. Timing, I think, will be important. It would be good to know precisely what the details of the white paper are before obviously having that meeting with the local government minister. And as always, the meetings are always, we always invite the leaders of the county council and also the city council. And I suspect in this instance, we probably also need to invite the leader of Rutland County Council as well, given that they are within the greater Leicestershire boundary, which current legislation requires, so that we can all understand and have a good discussion. And I absolutely take Councillor Tillison's point. The resolution of any of this has to be cordial, and it also has to be for the benefit of residents and businesses within Leicestershire. So with that, I would like to move the motion so that we can actually make sure that we have some response when it's required to bring back through our scrutiny, cabinet and council to make sure that all councillors are fully informed as and when the white paper is published. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got a motion. It may be good because people will know leader. Is it a chance that you could read the motion out and the position statement?
Yeah, absolutely. So the position statement is as published, but I'll read out the motion at the end, which is to refer the subject of the position statement to Cabinet, so that following publication of the devolution and local recovery white paper, a detailed response be prepared and submitted to Cabinet following consideration by Scrutiny Commission and then brought back to this council.
Okay. Being as this is a motion, we're going to vote on it. Could I have a second? I think it's Councillor Fryer.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I would like to second it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, so you know the process now. We've got to go through the voting again. So I will start. I won't go through the whole bit, but I'm sure we know what we're doing now, hopefully. So I'll go straight to Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Baines.
Seen and heard everything, Mr. Mayor, and I support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Barclay.
I have listened and watched proceedings and I am for the motion.
Councillor Jenny Boker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Seen and heard and for the motion.
Councillor Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm in favour of the motion.
Mr. Mayor, it's Councillor Bentley here.
Oh, did I miss you?
Sorry, yes, you did.
Sorry about that. Could you do yours now?
Yes, that's fine, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, both seen and heard the item, and I'm for.
Thank you. Councillor Simon Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Julie Bradshaw.
Try again. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I can confirm that I have seen and heard the proceedings and I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Camsell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Capleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm I have seen and heard the proceedings and I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Lee Harper-Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Draycott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard and in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Sandy Forrest. I have seen and heard the proceedings and I am in favour of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fryer.
Thank you, Councillor Hilary Fryer. I have seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Gerard.
Seen, heard, for.
We'd like it a little bit longer though, Councillor Gerard.
I've heard it and I'm for.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Grimley, I've seen and heard the proceedings. I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Hamilton, I have seen and heard proceedings and I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Keith Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Keith Harris, Councillor Keith Harris. I've heard and seen the proceedings and I'm for.
Thank you. Councillor Christine Harris.
Thank you. I've listened and watched the proceedings and am for. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm Councillor Jane Hunt. I've both listened and seen the proceedings and I vote for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've both seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have watched the proceedings, I've listened to the proceedings, and I'm in favour of it. Is that long enough?
That is brilliant. Thank you so much. Councillor Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have seen the proceedings and listened to them, and I am for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Morgan here. I have seen and heard, and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's Councillor Paul Murphy. I have listened and watched the proceedings and I am for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Pacey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have seen, it's Councillor Pacey. I've seen and heard the proceedings and am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Paling. Councillor Parsons.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have seen and heard proceedings and I'm in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Parton.
Councillor Parton, I have seen and heard the proceedings. I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Poland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Popley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Popley, I have seen and heard the proceedings. I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Radford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have listened, Councillor Radford here, I have listened and watched the proceedings and support the motion. I look forward to a good debate in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Ransom.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. It's Councillor Ransom here.
Thank
I've
you.
seen, I've heard, and I'm for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rattray.
Hello, I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Rollins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have seen and heard the proceedings and I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have heard and seen the proceedings and I am for.
Thank you. Councillor Seaton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I am for.
Thank you. Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confirm that I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Smidovich.
Councillor Smidowitz, I have seen and heard the motion and I'm for.
Thank you. And again, I think I've been on all the time, so we had enough of me. I'm for the motion. Councillor Joan Tassell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Deborah Taylor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I vote for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Tillotson, I've seen and heard proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. And Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm voting for the motion.
Thank you. I'll just go to Adrian Ward now just to check the result.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unanimously in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Just confirm that with Karen.
So, Mr. Mayor, I can confirm unanimous as well, so the motion is carried.
Thank you. So the motion's carried. Thank you. I was just going to say, I think it was covered in the summing up by the leader about the extra meeting as such. So I think we can leave that to the leader who agreed. 8.2, impact of COVID-19 on the council. I call on Councillor Morgan to introduce the position statement regarding the impact of COVID-19 on the council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This position statement tries to cover many of the things that have been happening over the last 5.5 months. I have to say it feels a lot longer. There has been so much covered over that period. The response that the council has taken place has been covered and has been submitted to Scrutiny Commission. And there is another presentation to Scrutiny Commission on the 14th of September, which will give the Commission an opportunity to find out more about what the Council's been doing, but also ask questions. And there's an opportunity for any councillor who wishes to partake in that meeting to actually log in and actually hear the proceedings. It's worth noting, I think, that the response of the council has been phenomenal, particularly our officer team. I've received so many communications over the last few months from residents who have just thanked the council for what they've been able to do for them. You noted, Mr. Mayor, during your opening remarks that over 10,000 food parcels have been delivered. And I know just how many people have actually benefited from that particular response from the council, but that's been one of many. and we've carried on delivering the vast majority of services throughout this most difficult time. Many of the services that we're now delivering are being delivered in ways that maybe we hadn't even considered 6 months ago, but they're now being delivered in such a way that residents can access them best, and also they've adapted to how we now need to work through social distancing and the sort of services that are now priorities for our residents. And likewise for businesses. So many people I've come across have been incredibly impressed by how quickly we managed to distribute the money that the government gave us to support businesses at the very depths of the pandemic and the lockdown. But as we're all aware, the positive results are starting to creep up again, both locally and also nationally. And as we head into winter, the response that we need to give as an authority will be required again. So I do urge all councillors not only to read the reports as flagged through the position statement, but also to read the reports as submitted to the Scrutiny Commission and also to Cabinet to find out what else is actually being done, so that you can actually understand fully all the nuances that the council's gone through to provide the best services for residents and businesses within the borough. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. If any councillor wish to do so, would like to speak, please press the raise hand features in the Zoom. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at the moment, starting with Councillor Barclay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm immensely proud to be a member of this council, and I think the way that the council responded to the needs of residents in an unprecedented situation is quite remarkable. We hear a lot of criticism of councils, but I think Charnwood has absolutely shown the quality of its councillors and also its officers. We've managed to divest ourselves of 31.6 million in grants to assist our businesses, those who weren't initially able to qualify for that. There were 260 businesses helped in that way. Those who didn't qualify under the first tranche, we managed to help and helped another 185 businesses. We've given free advertising to various businesses throughout the borough. We've had the communities pulled together, and Charnwood has coordinated it through Community Action Charnwood. We've heard of 10,000 food parcels being delivered to the needy, along with serving the needs of the people in terms of pharmacy provision. I think it's quite remarkable how Charnwood has orchestrated community groups right around the borough to come together and provide services in this dire situation. We adapted very rapidly as councillors and as officers within days. There are in this time when there are so many people, we just hear such bad news. There is so much good that we've done. We've got, well, only recently in the last few days, we've got a lighthouse facility at Charnwood campus, which will provide 400 more jobs. We're reopening the leisure centres. We have provided planning services, housing services, rehouse many people who are homeless, and I'm really proud. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. I noticed that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more speakers. We've got 20 minutes, so I think I'll close it at that and just see how we go. So next one is Councillor Meir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, the Labour Group pays its respect to all those in Charnwood who have lost their lives to this deadly virus, and our condolences go to their families and loved ones. We stand side by side with them. Their loss is our loss. It's been a challenging 6 months, to say the least, and the landscape out there, as we know it, has changed beyond recognition. If you told me at the beginning of the year that our high streets would be shut down, millions furloughed, thousands would need food parcels, our council offices would close their doors, and tens of thousands up and down the country would die, I would say you are watching one too many disaster movies. However, the last few months have been horrible, scary, bewildering for many, and life-changing for some. I think the council response has been very good, very, very good. From the setting up of Charmwood Community Action, to getting the homeless off the streets and into hotels, and to distribute millions to businesses. I think officers worked quickly and diligently on those tasks as they were immediate and needed doing. Of course, there will be proper scrutiny at a later date when all scrutiny committees are back up and operational, and we will be able to look at more detail on the council's response. Turning to my own experience in my own ward and East Loughborough is the uncertainty faced by people and businesses, those that were furloughed or lost their jobs, and those that had seen their businesses dry up overnight. Community centres, Fareham Hall, Shriram Centre and the Bangladesh Social Association had to close overnight, their futures uncertain. I am happy to report that although the future is far from certain for these community buildings, short term their futures are secure. Along with a few local residents, I was able to help set up a local food bank to those who are in desperate need in Loughborough. But I was more than overjoyed when Charmwood Community Action took over that role, and it shows how the voluntary sector and the council can work together to deliver an excellent service for the people of Charmwood. And I think partnership working such as this should only grow in the coming months and years. The frightening thing is, though, is that this pandemic isn't over yet. The response to the request for a position statement has laid bare the financial uncertainties that the council faces, and central government, contrary to what it said in the early weeks of the pandemic, will not be picking up the town. Our town centres are nowhere near as busy as they were, and the shops that have closed are all too noticeable. In Loughborough alone, you have just to walk down Market Street to see the number of shops that have remained closed. Mr. Mayor, there is a lot that I could carry on saying, but conscious that we only have 20 minutes, I will defer to my fellow councillors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to echo what Councillor Barclay has already said, to highly commend the work of the council and its officers in such extraordinary circumstances. The ability to get all officers working from home in a matter of days, the ability to get us online like we are tonight so that we can still engage with the public, the ability to get the town centre up and running to a near normal as possible under such circumstances is just extraordinary, with the minimal amount of disruption to frontline services. So just thank you to everybody involved.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'd also like to say thank you to the leader and the team for the production of the position statement. One element of the position statement talks about the need for the council to continue to evolve in the way its services are delivered. In my ward, Shelthorpe, there are many residents who do not have access to computers or smartphones. In addition, many of my residents are also housebound. How will you ensure that the continued evolution of the delivery of our services does not adversely impact on such residents? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harper-Davis.
I'd just like to say very briefly, Mr. Mayor, I think extreme credit should be given to the Chief Executive and officers for the phenomenal job they've done, turning business grants around within 2 days, and I couldn't sing their praises enough. I've even had people on social media from the Forest Epping just to say we wish we lived in Charmwood Borough because the council have done an exceptional job. So my personal thanks go to Chief Exec and the officers, and I think the delivery of services has been amazing. We've had to make some very difficult decisions, however we've got through it. I know we're not at the end of the journey yet, but I think we've done a phenomenal job so far. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Parton.
Okay. 2 aspects. Firstly, that when we talking about leadership, good leadership is where you actually think, okay, we have a big problem, and the first thing you do is you go to other people and you triage, are you all right? what do you need to get through this? And the council were exemplary because, I mean, for example, protecting charities, we've seen what they've done through John Storer House, the homeless provision, funding businesses, retail, commerce, industry, and reopening services. Some services were always open, emergency housing repairs, but then the town centre and general housing repairs opened up. Secondly, what do we look for in a leader? We look for someone that will actually give us the facts and will have to choose between two hard decisions. It's not two easy decisions. And the one person that hasn't really been mentioned very much at all at the moment, as well as the chief executive, is the leader. He's had to shoulder the responsibility of all of this pandemic, and he's done it in a very humble. He's working meticulously hard, and I would like to pay tribute to him this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Rattray.
Thank you. I just want to take the opportunity just to say a big thank you to the refuge and recycling teams and the street cleaning teams that have worked throughout the pandemic. The Bristol community this week have actually given hampers to the crews because they're so grateful for the work that they've done and the positive comments that have been said over the last all through the pandemic, but in the last week since the treat hampers were handed out, have all been really positive and really thankful. So I just want to pass on the thanks from the Bristol community really for the crews there. They've been brilliant.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just want to add that I was the lead member for communities at the outbreak of the pandemic, and the amazing work of all our staff to support all our vulnerable residents and all those that needed food and the very basic of supplies. They just kicked into action and worked relentlessly without any breaks. I was fortunate there to actually go and visit them in the community hub. It was an amazing setup that they've got going there, so well organised, and it was just a joy to be shown around there and to meet the staff and all the volunteers that put the food parcels together and did the deliveries. So I had an amazing few hours there, and I was very, very humbled to actually see the hard work that they did there. So I just want to pay tribute to them and grateful for them. We don't know what the future is going to hold for us. We don't know if there's going to be a second wave, but I just know that whatever the future holds, that I have 100% faith in Charnwood Borough Council, our chief exec, the leader, the staff and all our councillors, that we will do all we can to support residents and businesses through whatever may come in the future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Draycott.
Yes, thank you, Mr.
Final speaker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like other speakers, well done to the council for a very excellent job over the last several months. It proves the value of having a local council like Charnwood Borough Council on your doorstep. I dread to think with the changes that are being proposed in a decade or so, whenever these things happen every so often, there may be a town council here that won't have the resources to deal with the pandemic the way that Charnwood Borough Council has done at the moment. And I think that's food for thought. After saying that, I don't think we should lose sight that services are not back as normal. And certainly for councillors dealing with casework, it can be quite frustrating the amount of time and the work it takes to try and get replies and responses to the public out there. So just again, Mr. Mayor, well done to the council, but I think we've still got a very long way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Morgan to sum up, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and also to all councillors who made comments this evening. Absolutely know that there's even more to do. The officer team, and I have to say all of you as councillors as well, have played a huge part in supporting our communities over the last 5 to 6 months. There is a lot more to do. Unfortunately, this has not gone away. We have winter coming, and we don't know what the future holds. But I do know for sure that what we actually promised our residents and our communities at the beginning of this pandemic, which was that we would stand by them and we would support them, will stay true. All of you will play your part, as will our officers and our chief exec, to make sure that our communities get the support that they will need over the coming months, as they have over the last 5.5 months. So I pay tribute to our officer teams. I pay tribute to the organizations that have worked alongside them to make sure that those in our community who have needed the most help have received it. But I also pay tribute to all of you, to my cabinet colleagues and to the councillors at Charnwood, who I know are valued by their communities for the support they have given at this critical time. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. I don't have any motion in front of me, but if councillors wish to do so, a motion can be moved to refer the subject position statement back to the council, to the cabinet or appropriate committee. I don't know whether I can just move forward now, because I don't have any indication that there is any way to go forward with that. Thank you. Item 9, motion on notice. There is one motion on notice on the agenda on page 38-39, Local Electricity Private Members Bill 2020. As a reminder, motions in this form can be debated and voted on by the council. This normal rules of debate apply, so councillors may speak up to 3 minutes, and then any amendments may be moved. I call on Councillor Ward to propose the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the motion to support the Local Electricity Private Members Bill as set out on page 38 and 39 of the agenda papers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rollins.
I second this, Mr. Mayor, and reserve my right to speak.
Okay, thank you. If any councillor would like to speak, please press the raise hand feature on the Zoom. I have Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very quickly, I'd like to say that I fully support this motion, and I'd like to thank Councillor Ward for actually bringing it to council tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to echo what Councillor Bolton's just said and just add a little bit more. There is no doubt that the local electricity supply is insufficiently supported by current legal and regulatory regime. It is financially difficult to achieve the licence required under the Electricity Act of 1989 to sell electricity and gas directly to consumers. While the provisions are more relaxed in relation to commercial customers, consumers are rightly protected by law. And that is the need for this act, and that's why we're supporting it. There have been inroads into near complete grip of the big six monopoly of the electricity supplies over the past years, but these are by small companies who bear the brunt of fluctuating wholesale prices, and we've all seen what's happened to several of them over the last few months. So how can provisions be found to encourage smaller suppliers while protecting consumer rights? And this is something that will help. So imagine that you've got a community centre in your local area with a reasonably sized roof that fits solar panels. Then you can use that power generated in the operation of the building itself. But if there is an excess of supply, it has to go into the grid for a small reward, and usually about 5 pence per kilowatt. When the members of the community living on, say, on the same street or the surrounding area have to pay an average price of 14.37 pence per kilowatt for their own supplies. So this kind of bill encourages local supplies and also allows local community supplies to benefit from selling their power to the grid and make it profitable, really, so they're not overpowered by the big six. And that's why I'm supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So 10-minute rule bills traditionally have very, very little chance of ever making it into law. But I know that the benefit of 10-minute rule bills is often that they help to influence or raise issues with government, to allow government to make their own amendments to any legislation to actually accommodate some of the issues raised in the bill. Peter Aldous, who's the sponsor of this particular 10-minute rule bill, is a very old friend of mine. We were work colleagues before we either knew that politics existed 30 odd years ago, back in Suffolk, where we both lived at that point. He was a surveyor and I was an architect working on a very fine building. Since then, Peter has become an MP in Waveney, which again has an extremely large offshore power generation, or has become a centre for offshore power generation, and therefore this is an issue that's very close to his heart. There are elements of this bill which I'm sure will become usable by government to try and actually help it change future legislation. But whilst I appreciate this may not necessarily in itself become a law, I do think that it raises some good points, and that's why my group are willing to and happy to support, because of its potential in the future, rather than necessarily that this bill in its own right will become law, but hopefully it will help to influence future legislation and tweak and change accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a very commendable motion, which we all support. And the idea of enabling local people to come up with local solutions to meet the challenges of climate change is a very good idea. And I think such a concept would make the local economy more resilient, and it would also create sustainable jobs. And perhaps, Mr. Mayor, at the end of it, it suggests that we should write to local MPs. Well, at least we have the honour of having one of our local MPs at this meeting. So perhaps she could pass on the message that it is hopefully unanimously supported by Charnwood Borough Council.
Thank you. And my final speaker is Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to endorse what's been said by the other speakers this evening. As a person who spent his career working in the energy industry and in regulation, I think this is a very interesting proposal. I actually took the time to actually read the bill in Parliament. It's literally only a few lines long, I think, as Councillor Morgan indicated, what it does is establish a concept that is widely supported. It establishes the concept of a local supplier, which doesn't exist in law right now, and that will therefore allow local renewable generators to be able to supply locally at reduced costs, giving them a higher rate of return and lower costs for consumers. So there's real win-wins here. So I would, as I say, I would absolutely support this motion.
Thank you. I have no more speakers up, so I will go to Councillor Rollins, who reserved the right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nothing really too much to add, other than to say, obviously, the motion does acknowledge the work that Charnwood Borough Council has done to reduce its carbon footprint and continues to do so. We all know that we voted on a motion to become carbon neutral by 2030, and it's not just about our own operations. What we're looking at is what we can do to support the residents and businesses in Charnwood, and indeed further, to reduce their carbon emissions. And this bill I see as an opportunity of showing our commitment towards that, which is why we are very happy to support the motion tonight and follow the recommendations in it by writing to our MPs and supporting the campaign for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I now go back to Councillor Ward?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd just like to thank Councillor Rollins for agreeing to second the motion, and all of the other members who spoke in favour of the motion. As some of the members have already noted, there are manifold benefits to this bill, not least the fact that it would enable small community scale renewable energy providers to set up in areas like Charnwood, and it would enable people to buy their energy directly from those providers, which may be schools, community centres, which means generating that income and keeping it in our community, increasing our resilience, as Councillor Mercer said, and reducing our dependence on imported fossil fuels. So I would strongly encourage members to vote in favour of supporting the bill. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And now I have to put in the motion to the vote, and you have had the it's on 38 and 39, the motion on notice, so you know the procedure now, so I will go through as we have done previously. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have seen and heard the proceedings and I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Baines.
Seen and heard the motion, Mr. Mayor, and I support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Barclay.
I've listened and watched proceedings. I'm for the motion.
Thank you. I won't miss him this time. Mr. Bentley, Councillor Bentley.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for.
Councillor Boker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Baldwin. Councillor Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm voting in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Simon Bradshaw, Councillor Simon Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm in favour of the motion.
Councillor Julie Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've listened and watched proceedings and I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I can confirm that I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Campsall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've also seen and heard the proceedings and I'm in favour of the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have seen and heard the proceedings and I am in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Lee Harper Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings. I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Draycott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Seen and heard the proceedings and for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confirm that I have both seen and heard the debate and I am in favour of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fryer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confirm that I've seen and heard the proceedings and I am in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Gerard.
Have seen, have heard and for.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Grimley, I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm that I have seen and heard proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Keith Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for. And you've forgotten the former mayor, Councillor Capleton.
Oh, that is sad news. Sorry about that. I shall go back in a minute. I shall just do Christine Harris first.
Can I speak?
Yes.
I've listened and watched the proceedings. I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Capleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confirm I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I am Councillor Jane Hunt. I have both listened and heard the proceedings and taken notes. But as the motion is to write to me, I abstain on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've seen, heard and participated in the debate and I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have seen and heard and participated and I am in favour of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It's Councillor Morgan here. I have seen and heard the debate and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's Councillor Murphy here. I've listened and watched the proceedings, listened, paid attention, and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm that I've seen and heard the debate and I am, of course, very much in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Pacey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Pacey, I have seen and heard the motion and support it.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm that I have seen and heard everything and support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Parton.
Councillor Parton, I have seen and heard the proceedings. I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Poland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have seen and heard the proceedings and I'm also in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Popley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm that I've both seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Radford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Radford here. I have listened and watched the proceedings and I support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Ransom.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I have seen, heard, and I am for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rattray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Rollins.
Mayor, I can confirm that I have seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confirm that I've both seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Seaton.
I can confirm that I've seen and heard the discussion and I am for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confirm that I have seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Margaret Smidovich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm that I've both seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. And me, Councillor David Snart, I've been here all the time, I think, so I'm for the motion. Councillor Joan Tassell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Joan Tassell, I have seen and heard the proceedings and I am for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Deborah Taylor, I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm I've seen and heard proceedings and I'm for the motion.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm that I've seen and heard the proceedings and I'm voting in favour.
Thank you. I'll just wait a few minutes because I go to Adrian Ward to check on the result of the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Except for the one abstention, the reasons for which Councillor Hunt explained, it was unanimously for.
Thank you. Can I just check that with Karen Widdowson?
Yeah. So, Mr. Mayor, I can confirm that the motion has been carried and it was clearly unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. The motion is carried. And could I thank Councillor Ward for bringing this forward? Thank you. I go on to item 10 now, which is questions on notice. As a reminder, the questions that councillors have submitted and the answers to them are in the supplementary pack. I will call on those councillors who have indicated that wish to ask a supplementary question or make a statement. Supplementary questions or statements must relate directly and exclusively to the question submitted, and any other supplementary question or statement will not be permitted. Each councillor will have 2 minutes to ask their supplementary question and or make their statement, and the councillor responding will also be able to speak for 2 minutes. Item 10.1, Twinning Town sites. Councillor Tillotson, would you like to ask your supplementary question or make your statement?
Thank you. Yes, I would. Thank you for the response. I do not doubt Charnwood Council's commitment to equality, but it is important to acknowledge that this is a serious human rights issue. A Loughborough resident said, "It's terrible that I'm not welcome in one of our twin towns." The response, however, throws doubt on whether Zamość has made this declaration. But what is not in doubt is that the Lublin voivodeship, of which Zamość is part, is definitely among the regions which have made this declaration. And this has led to a number of European towns severing their links with their Polish twins. And the EU has barred a number of Polish towns from joining the twinning movement. I have 3 questions. How will Zamościa's response be reported? What action will be taken, as regardless of Zamościa's response, they are part of a region that has declared itself unwelcoming of LGBT+ people? And thirdly, will the cabinet lead liaise with Schwäbisch Hall, our other twin town, our German twin town, as they are also twinned with Zamość? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harper-Davis, do you wish to respond?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Yes, thank you. Can I just say thank you to Councillor Tillotson for the question? And I can assure Councillor Tillotson that we're doing all we can to uncover exactly what's going on in Zamość. Her 3 questions will be answered. We're just trying to uncover by every way, shape or form what actually is going on there. So I can assure her that, we will do our utmost to just be reassuring that whatever will need to be done will be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 10.2, flooding. Councillor Gerard, I understand you want to ask a supplementary question.
Yes, if I may, please. Thank you, the Cabinet member, for the reply. My other question is, could this council ask developers to only put a ground base of 50% concrete down, as the ground can then breathe and disperse of excess fluid? The way they're doing it of 100% ground, the water's just staying there, not being able to get away. So when we get heavier floods, heavier rain, it starts flooding and the water can't go anywhere. And concrete to make is bad for the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey, do you wish to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Gerard, for your question. Certainly, when it comes to greenfield sites must be designed using sustainable urban drainage systems. In other words, sites have to put in place a set of drainage systems in order to either improve the drainage system that is already there, or to certainly not make it any worse than if it was already a greenfield site. Certainly with brownfield sites, it's very different. They only have to do a reduction of 50%, but certainly developers have to adhere to those rules, and certainly on greenfield sites, there are a lot of mitigating things that are put in place to try and combat the presence of obviously paving over a greenfield site.
Thank you.
Can I come back, please?
No, you can't. Sorry. Item 10.3, moratorium on housing evictions due to the pandemic. Councillor Draycott, would you like to ask your supplementary question or make your statement?
I'd like to make a short statement and a supplementary question, please. First of all, thank the Cabinet Lead and the officers for the response, and like to also say well done to the Council for managing a very challenging situation in March by finding accommodation for all of the 85 people, ensuring they and indeed the borough was safer. That work, I'm pleased to say, has been ongoing but will soon change. And as a result, we face another crisis with at least 221 tenants possibly facing legal action. Even with the delays which are inevitable with the government's new 6-month notice period, adults and children could face being evicted over this winter period, and bearing in mind a second wave of COVID-19 is also being predicted. My question, Mr. Mayor, is how will the Cabinet Lead ensure that we do not go back to people rough sleeping in our borough, bearing in mind we are far from out of this pandemic, and this winter will now be an even harder test for all involved, bearing in mind due to these possible evictions, numbers could be even higher than in March. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mercer, do you wish to respond?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Draycott for actually asking a question on housing. It's been a while that we've had to wait for Labour to ask questions on housing. And she put forward 5 questions, which I think we've largely answered. And I agree, it is going to be a challenge. Not perhaps because of any evictions that take place by Charnwood, but simply because of the housing crisis that's on the horizon as a consequence of COVID. We normally have 2 or 3 rough sleepers in Charnwood, and I've always been happy with the way in which we've dealt with them. And these 85 that we've actually housed weren't rough sleepers. They're actually people in imminent risk of becoming rough sleepers in the judgment of outside bodies. I think it's also important to stress that it's not only cost us a lot of money, but it's put a lot of strain on the officers who've had to actually deal with this. But I can assure Councillor Draycott, it is an issue that we're very conscious of, that we're constantly discussing, and one that I'm more than happy to keep her in the loop about what we're doing. And I'm happy to listen to any suggestions that we have about how we could deal with the problem.
Thank you. Item 10.4, financial recovery. Councillor Bolton, would you like to ask your supplementary question or make your statement?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the lead member and officers for their comprehensive response. The council has lost a substantial percentage of its income since the start of COVID-19. It seems that local government and Charnwood Borough Council specifically has been left with a substantial shortfall between what was promised to counteract the cost of COVID-19 and what we are actually receiving. Your response refers to income expected from central government, but some of this is by no means certain. For example, the 71% of lost income. It's good that we've built up substantial reserves, but these will be depleted very quickly, particularly if we have a second COVID-19 spike. So could the lead member please let us know, if not tonight, then subsequently, as a matter of urgency, how much we will receive from the government and how we're going to plug the gap in funding without fully depleting our reserves. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barclay, would you wish to respond?
Yes, I would. I can understand. Thank you for the question, Councillor Bolton. I can understand your concerns. We haven't run out of money yet. The government's actually provided us with about £2.1 million worth in COVID emergency grants, and we still have 1.1 million of that which is unspent and which could be used towards losses. We will be undertaking a review of the services. We will be looking at the way we provide services. We'll also be looking at increasing our income through investments. One thing we will not be doing is sitting on our hands and doing nothing. And council and scrutiny and everyone else will be kept fully advised of what we're doing. I'm really pleased that I didn't foresee what was going to happen. Our reserve position is still sound, but you're quite right. We do need to do something to make up the losses. I think there is still some uncertainty as to whether the income that we've lost will be fully covered throughout the whole of the financial year by the government, or exactly what will happen. But irrespective of what happens, we will be all right this year, and we've got time to adjust to make sure that we remain sound and continue to provide services to the residents. So I think the main answer covers it. Most of the questions, but rest assured, all councillors and council will be kept abreast of what we're going to do to try and overcome any shortfall that we find ourselves with at the end of the year.
Thank you. Item 10.5, cancelled events. I understand, Councillor Draycott, you haven't got a question or statement on this. Can I just confirm that?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you so much. Thank you. 10.6, confidential documents. Councillor Julie Bradshaw, would you like to ask your supplementary question or make your statement?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to do both.
Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank the officers and lead member for the response to my question. It outlines how such an important matter has been managed. We're now, though, in a different world, and with agile home working, more stringent checks rather than just relying on past good practice is required. So my question, therefore, is could the Cabinet lead take this matter up, please, with the Chief Executive and ensure a policy is produced to suit the times we now find ourselves in, and that clear lines of responsibility are established as to who is responsible for managing such data across the Council, which includes, of course, elected members. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smidovich, do you wish to respond?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Julie, for a very timely question. I think remote working or agile working has made a tremendous impact on us all. It's not just the officers. I think it's also members as well. We now have to store a considerable amount of information safely at home on equipment, and occasionally paper that has confidential information. And I think for members that it's very important that we always hold that thought about the level of seriousness that anything we have, the effect of it on what would happen if it disappeared and others got hold of it and amended it. Well, we don't know where it could go as a problem in the future. But certainly I will take the matter up with the Chief Exec as you've requested, and we'll look at these lines of responsibility. But I have been assured that these policies and procedures so far are being adhered to. But thank you, it was a timely question.
Thank you. That concludes the questions. So I'll go on to item 11, minute references. There are no minute references. Item 12, urgent executive decisions exempted from call-in, page 40. This is a report to inform Council of decisions which were exempt from call-in in accordance with Scrutiny Committee Procedure 11.9. If any councillor would like to ask a question, please indicate your wish to do so by pressing the raised hand feature on Zoom. I've no hands raised, so I'll move on. Item 13, urgent executive decisions taken during the COVID-19 pandemic, page 69. This is a report to inform the Council of decisions taken by the Chief Executive and/or strategic directors and heads of service in respect of council function decisions which were made under urgent provision due to COVID-19 pandemic. If any councillor would like to ask a question, please indicate your wish to do so by pressing the raised hand feature on Zoom. I don't see any hands coming up, so I'll move on. Item 14, changes to the delegation of executive functions, page 91. This is a report to inform the council of changes to the delegation of executive functions. If any councillor would like to ask a question, please indicate your wish to do so by pressing the raised hand feature on Zoom. I have no hands raised. I'll move on. I am now moving on to item 15, appointments to committees. Are there no appointments to committees I'm aware of? Has anybody got anything to raise? Any councillor? No. Right, close of business. I'm delighted that we got through quite in good time, in my view, but others will have their comments to make to me probably, and it will be a good idea if you've got something to add from tonight. I would be very delighted to receive those, and I'm sure officers would. Could I just thank officers? They have been very good to me in terms of helping me along and to get this on the road tonight. So I think thank you to officers. Thank you to councillors who have been absolutely brilliant, I think, at this first Zoom session in terms of a main meeting. So I look forward now with a bit more confidence to the next one, and probably another one in between time, but there we are. But thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next meeting. And thank you. And I really now just want to say that we'll remind councillors that they may stay behind to share memories of former councillor Marion Smith. So I think I'll just go over to Karen Widdowson just to check how we do this, and we'll get going on that. So just thank you again to all councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, so Matt Goodger, IT, needs to